My girlfriend and I had just moved into our new home, the place we'd been dreaming about for years. It was perfect for us in every way. We even had Bella, our rescue cat, padding around the place like she owned it. Everything felt just right. Well, almost the only downside was the house to our right. It looked abandoned. From what we could tell, the owner had started renovating it, but for whatever reason, never finished. The layout of the street meant that on our side, right next to our own back garden entrance, there was also an entrance to that abandoned property's back garden. There used to be a fence separating the two, but it had been torn down for a new one that was never actually installed, so the two back gardens were basically connected. Behind that abandoned house was another property, fenced off, where several young men lived. Every now and then, we'd catch them cutting straight through the empty property's back garden to get to the street. We figured maybe they knew the owner and had permission, so we didn't think much of it. Then came our first night in the new house. We were sitting outside, enjoying the evening air, when I happened to glance up at the houses behind us. That's when I noticed him, a man standing at a darkened window, staring right at us. No expression, no attempt to hide it, just a staring. It was unnerving, but we told ourselves he was probably just curious about the new neighbors. Still, after 30 minutes of that blank, unbroken stare, we decided to go inside. The next few days were normal. I went to work. My fiancée kept unpacking boxes. Then, one night, we went back out into the garden to relax and watch the stars. That peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a wooden board being moved. 3 men stepped into view. They just stood there, watching us, trying to break the tension. I asked, "Are you guys okay?" One of them, the youngest, maybe late 20s, was holding a large bag. No clue what was inside. He offered us some stolen dishwasher tablets, of all things. We declined. I cracked a nervous joke. He smirked and said, "Okay." Then they left. But what bothered me was how casual they were about stepping into our garden, like it was their right. We told ourselves it was a one-time weird encounter, but it wasn't. They started coming into our garden more often, always with that same unsettling confidence. They'd lift the fence between the gardens and stroll right through, sometimes doing little things that felt like they were meant to intimidate us. I should mention, my girlfriend and I are both only 20, of course. We couldn't help but wonder if they were targeting us because they thought we'd be easy to scare. Then one day, while I was cleaning the front room, I saw 2 police officers slip into the abandoned garden. They lifted the fence, looked around for a few minutes, and left without a word. I thought it was odd, but just went back to my day. A few days later, the police knocked on our door. They explained that the men behind us had been evicted for antisocial behavior, not just toward us, but toward other neighbors as well. We were relieved. They hadn't physically hurt us yet, but at least they wouldn't get the chance to escalate things. Life started to feel normal again, until one afternoon. I was in the bath when I heard a loud bang from outside. I threw on some clothes and went looking for my girlfriend. I found her in the spare bedroom, phone in hand, recording something out the window, the one that overlooked the now empty garden. I asked what she was filming, and that's when she shushed me before I could say anything. After a moment, she whispered what had happened. A man we'd never seen before had been standing in the garden, pointing straight at our bedroom window. When she spotted him, he suddenly bolted toward our house at full speed. On the way past, he grabbed our door handle, like he was testing it, then darted back into the abandoned garden. We watched, stunned, as he threw the broken fence up and started pounding on the windows of the empty house. We called the police immediately. They came, watched the video, took our statement, and left. But we were rattled. Why try our door and then break into that house? What exactly was he planning? A few nights later, we were in bed when we heard it whistling. Not the casual kind, the kind men use to harass women. It was 2:16 in the morning. We stayed completely still, listening. Then came a soft tapping on our window. My heart was pounding. We checked the cameras, but for some reason, nothing had been recorded. Whoever it was must have left quickly, because the noises stopped soon after. But neither of us could sleep. The next day, we went to my mom's house for the night. When we came back in the morning, something was wrong. Our Ring doorbell was gone, not stolen exactly, just removed and placed on the floor. The SD card was missing. Someone had been back, and we knew exactly who. We called the police again. The officer on the phone told us to keep every door and window locked. Then she added, and I'll never forget her saying this, that removing a camera could be a sign someone was planning something. That made it 10 times worse. The whistling, the banging, the noises in the night. It all continued for weeks. They didn't try our door again, so we told ourselves maybe it was over. But 3 weeks later, it got even more bizarre. We were in bed, watching some old funny clips from our security camera, when we switched to the live feed, and there he was, a man in a black mask, hood up, standing in our garden with his arms spread wide like he was imitating Jesus on the cross. He stared up at our bedroom window, head tilted, perfectly still. We froze. At the time, we'd moved the camera inside, so it wasn't recording. We didn't even think to grab our phones and screen record. We were just frozen. He said something, but we couldn't make out the words. Then he turned, walked to the opposite side of the street, and stood there, staring, for 30 minutes. We called the police yet again. Their response? It's not illegal to look at someone's property, even after we explained what he'd done on our lawn. They brushed it off, making us feel like we were overreacting. We couldn't sleep for days after that. Every sound outside, even the normal ones, set us on edge. Then, one night at 2:52 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. I shook my girlfriend awake. Someone's outside. I know it. Please, check the camera. She pulled up the feed, and there they were. 2 masked men coming from the side of our house, flashlights sweeping across our windows. One of them, the same man who had been tormenting us, was holding something that looked a lot like a crowbar. Why us? What did they want? For days afterward, he would stand across the street, pointing, waving, shouting things we couldn't make out. He'd stand there for hours, across the street, or sometimes right outside our garden, staring up at our window. Every time we looked, he would hold that blank, unblinking gaze. It was deliberate, meant to scare us, and it worked. We kept calling the police, every time, and every time. They did almost nothing. The harassment never stopped. We've got cameras now, recording everything, but it doesn't feel like enough. Just today, he was back, standing there, motionless, eyes fixed on our bedroom window. We caught it on video. We're absolutely terrified, but we'll update if anything changes. Low, tense music begins. Let me preface this by saying, I know how this is going to sound. Paranoid, unhinged, delusional. But I swear, every single thing I'm about to tell you really happened. It started with a face, or, more accurately, faces. Faces that all looked just slightly off. 3 months ago, I ended things with my ex, Caleb. We'd been together almost 2 years. The breakup was long overdue. Caleb wasn't violent. He never hit me, but he was controlling, possessive in that slow, calculating way that creeps in before you realize it's happening. The worst kind of way. He would track when I was on my phone, quiz me about my day to see if my answers matched, always looking for inconsistencies, always testing me. When I finally left him, I changed my number, shut down my social media, moved apartments. I thought I was free. Then came the barista. It was a Tuesday morning. I stopped into this little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop near my new place, a place I'd only been twice before. The girl behind the counter smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes that made me pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze. That was Caleb's nickname for me, not a cute one, either. He used it sarcastically when I was upset. What's wrong, sunshine? That mocking tone he loved. I brushed it off. Coincidence, right? But then it happened again. A few days later, I took a rideshare to work. Different driver, older man, maybe mid-50s. He kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, like he was trying to place my face. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Ever figure out what you were running from?" My stomach dropped. Caleb had said those exact words once, after I told him I needed space to figure myself out. He'd leaned in, dead serious, and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now, to strangers in totally unrelated situations, had repeated Caleb's words, word for word. And it kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just disappear." A guy passing me on the street muttered, "Still wearing your hair like that." Someone who worked in my building once said, "You always like this song," while quietly humming the exact tune Caleb used to play when we argued. It wasn't just the words that chilled me. It was the way they looked at me, like they knew me, or thought they did. Different faces, different voices, but the same eyes. I did something I'm not proud of. I reached out to Caleb, not directly, but through his sister. I told her to tell him to stop. I thought maybe he'd hired a private investigator. Maybe he was pulling strings, feeding people details about my life. I just wanted it to end. She texted back the next day. "I don't know what you're talking about. Caleb's in rehab. Been there 6 weeks. No phone." I didn't believe her. I figured she was covering for him. Then I saw a photo she posted on Facebook. Caleb, pale and hollow-eyed, holding a one-day sober chip. It couldn't be him, at least not directly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that these strangers knew too much. One night, I stayed late at work, dragging my feet. I didn't want to go home. My apartment hadn't been broken into. Nothing bad had happened there, but it didn't feel safe anymore. Finally, around 10 p.m., I packed up and left. I walked the 10 minutes back, hood up, headphones in, but no music playing. That way I could still hear if someone followed me. As I turned onto my block, I noticed a man sitting on the stoop across from my building, hoodie up, head down. I almost walked past without a thought, until he spoke. Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine. I froze. He didn't look at me, didn't even lift his head, just kept staring at the ground like he was reading something on the pavement. I forced myself to keep walking. No response. When I got to my building, I locked every bolt on the door and sat on the couch for hours, listening to the silence. Eventually, exhaustion won. The next morning, I found my doormat flipped over. It sounds small, but my apartment is on the top floor. No one accidentally passes by. On the underside, in scrawled pen, were the words, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't know what it meant, but I still ran to the bathroom and threw up. That afternoon, I booked a hotel. I didn't even pack clothes. I just left. The clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. Small, quiet, a little stuffy, but safe. At least, that's what I told myself. Until 2 a.m., 3 slow knocks on my door. I sat up in bed, frozen. Another round of knocks, just as deliberate. I crept to the peephole. A woman, maybe mid-40s. Her face was wrong, completely blank, expressionless. She stared straight at my door. No movement. No words. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, she turned and walked away. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had been sent to my room. They said no, and that all the other rooms on my floor were empty. That's when it clicked. These weren't random people. They were being fed details about me, phrases I'd heard Caleb use, quirks that felt too familiar to be coincidence. But if it wasn't Caleb himself, then who was doing this and why? I thought about him in rehab, about his obsession with control, about the way he always needed to make sure I was never entirely free of him. He didn't need to be the one knocking on my door. He just needed to send others in his place. And then I remembered something. Months before we broke up, Caleb had mentioned a forum he was part of. He'd made it sound harmless, a space for productivity tips and self-improvement. I can't recall the name. Maybe he never even told me. But looking back, it felt more like some twisted, cult-like role play. Only this wasn't a game for me. It was happening in real life. Someone, probably Caleb, had hired people to speak his words, copy his patterns, so that even if he was gone, I would still feel him everywhere. It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti, him tagging strangers with his presence so I could never be sure whose face I was really looking at. And I don't think it was about watching me. I think it was about making sure I never stopped watching for him. So I moved again, deleted my social media again, dyed my hair, warned friends not to tell anyone where I was. For a while, it worked. Until last week, I was walking home from the bookstore when a woman passed me and said, still hiding behind books, "Sunshine." She didn't stop, didn't even glance back. I realized then, I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe Caleb paid some underground service to torment me for a year. Maybe he made it public. Maybe this has turned into a sick little game for strangers. Who can scare Sunshine the most? Who can get the closest without touching her? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The paranoia is eating me alive. Music, my family isn't the traveling type. So when my aunt suddenly suggested a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes, we were all surprised, but excited. We wanted new memories. My cousin found a massive airbun, somehow big enough for all 18 of us. A miracle, especially for the price. It sat right on the beach, with sweeping lake views that looked like the edge of the ocean. Most of us claimed rooms in the main house, but with so many people, a few of us, me and 3 cousins, got placed in a second building behind it, a 2-story garage with bedrooms upstairs. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We spent the day in the hot tub, lounging on the sand, taking in the scenery. It wasn't until that night that we actually went inside the garage to settle in. The place was dated and musty, with carpeted bathrooms that reeked of mold, stained bedding, and a flimsy latch on the door. Clearly, The cleaners had focused on the main house and left this one to rot. My cousins were horrified, refusing to touch the beds until the sheets were washed, so I suggested. We decided to do laundry. The machines were tiny, so we could only wash one set of sheets at a time, which meant we'd be up for hours. We hung out upstairs, waiting for the first load. My cousin Maria grumbled about how we'd ended up in the worst spot. As she spoke, that uneasy feeling crept in, the kind I've felt before, the kind that usually ends in nightmares, or worse. I told my cousins to stay alert. They listened. We'd all been through a break-in before, back when we lived in Detroit, so no one took it lightly. Round midnight, the buzzer went off downstairs. I went alone, switched the load to the dryer, and carried the freshly washed sheets back up. When my cousins saw how clean they were, they wanted theirs done too, so I kept running loads, back and forth, up and down the stairs. By 2:37 a.m., we were finally finished, beds made, exhaustion hitting hard. My cousin Nikki insisted we leave a light on. They all fell asleep quickly, but I stayed up, doing schoolwork on my phone. I'm a light sleeper now ever since the break-in, and even half asleep, I notice everything. Then, at 3 a.m., it hit. A deafening bang slammed against the garage door, like someone had thrown their whole body into it. I sat bolt upright. My cousins didn't stir. I told myself it was just the wind, but it was too heavy, too solid for that. I stayed quiet, tried to convince myself it was nothing. Then it happened again. Same bone-rattling crash, this time shaking the door so hard the whole garage trembled. I was fully awake now, staring into the lamplit room as my cousin slept. No animal could have done that. No gust of wind, either. 20 minutes later, a third boom hit. This time, two of my cousins shot upright. "Did you hear that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Nikki's eyes were wide. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, "but it's the third time." We all knew no wind could make that sound. Nikki grabbed her phone and texted her mom, my aunt, at 4:11 a.m. She replied. She knew it was serious. She woke my uncle. He went outside to check the property. We stayed frozen upstairs until we heard knocking. It was my uncle standing there with my dad and a few of our older male cousins. That's when I knew this wasn't a prank. No wind, no kids messing around. "There's someone on the property," my uncle said. My heart dropped. We threw our stuff into suitcases and bolted to the main house. By then, most of the family was awake from the commotion. We gathered in the living room, piecing it together, me explaining the first two crashes, my cousins confirming the third. That's when my aunt said. My uncle went out to investigate, and my aunt followed close behind. As they rounded the garage, my uncle suddenly shouted, "Hey," at someone standing in the shadows behind it. Right then, the main house's door slammed shut behind my aunt. No wind, no reason. Her stomach dropped. If the door had shut, did that mean someone slipped inside? She bolted to wake my dad and the cousins. They searched the house from top to bottom, nothing. Then my uncle told us what he'd seen. A man was standing behind the garage, not hiding, not moving, just staring, as if he wanted to be seen. When my uncle called out, the man didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply turned and walked away, and then vanished. Not into the darkness, into thin air. No rustling leaves, no footsteps in the dirt, no prints left behind. My uncle isn't the type to make things up. He's a practical, level-headed man, which made his words hit harder. Then my brothers spoke up. They'd found two playing cards, both jesters, one in the main house, one in the garage. The one in the garage was twisted, almost demonic. One cousin pointed out that jesters symbolize mockery, and the loud bangs had happened right around 3 o'clock a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It felt like we were being taunted. My uncle had checked for footprints, but found only his and my cousin's. Nothing from the man. Another cousin had even driven down the road during the commotion, searching for anyone fleeing. He found no one. That night, none of us went back to the garage. We all crammed into the main house, couches, floors, anywhere we could. My mom gave up her bed so we could sleep more comfortably. On the second night, she slept on a couch near the large windows. Around 4 o'clock a.m., she woke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. She didn't dare open her eyes, terrified she might see someone staring in. Then came the rattle of the basement door. The lock was flimsy, and my brothers and male cousins were sleeping down there. The door shook like someone was trying to force it open. My mom sprinted toward the basement, but when she reached the beachside entrance, nothing, no one. Outside, all the boys were still asleep. That was our last night. We were supposed to stay until Tuesday, but we packed up and left Monday. On the drive home, we couldn't stop dissecting what had happened. When my mom found out I'd been going downstairs alone to swap laundry, she suggested something chilling. Maybe someone had been watching me, waiting for a moment when I was alone in the garage. The time between my last laundry trip and the banging lined up almost perfectly. The theories started. Some thought it was a neighbor trying to scare us off. Others believed it was something paranormal, especially because of the gesture cards. My aunt made a good point. A normal person would run when my uncle spotted them. But this man didn't. He just watched and disappeared. We contacted the urban host, who said she'd check the camera above the garage door. We never heard from her again. It made us wonder, did she know him? Was he a neighbor? When we'd first arrived, my sister and cousin had walked along the beach and passed a woman next door. She didn't smile, didn't greet them, just watched, cold and expressionless. The house was isolated, and we understood that constant urban visitors could annoy locals. But we'd been respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. It was our first family trip, and hopefully not our last. Even after everything,